The morning mist clung to the plains of Chaldron like a shroud, but beneath its ethereal veil, two mighty empires stood poised for a battle that would reshape the Middle East forever. It was the 23rd of August, 1514, and the air crackled with tension as Sultan Selim I's Ottoman forces faced Shah I's Safavid army across the ancient battleground of eastern Anatolia. The conflict had been brewing for over a decade, its roots buried deep in the fertile soil of religious discord and territorial ambition. When Ismail I ascended to power in 1501, he had done more than simply claim the Persian throne. He had declared war on the very fabric of Islamic unity. His proclamation of Shia Islam as the official religion of the Safavid Empire sent shockwaves through the predominantly Sunni Ottoman realm, creating a schism that would echo through centuries. Sultan Selim I, known to his enemies as Selim the Grim, had watched with growing alarm as the young Safavid ruler consolidated power. The Shah's magnetic charisma and claims of divine descent had attracted thousands of Turkmen tribes from Ottoman territory, weakening Selim's grip on his eastern province. These defections were not merely political, they were existential threats to Ottoman supremacy. The Qizilbash, as these Shah supporters were known, wore distinctive red headgear and carried an almost fanatical devotion to their Shah that bordered on worship. The immediate catalyst for war came when Ismail's forces began pushing westward, capturing key cities in eastern Anatolia and threatening Ottoman trade routes. The fortress city of Erzurum, a crucial link in the empire's eastern defenses, fell to Safavid forces in 1513, sending panic through Istanbul. Ottoman merchants reported tales of Safavid cavalry sweeping through mountain passes, their curved swords gleaming in the highland sun as they carved out territories that had been Ottoman for generations. But this was more than a simple territorial dispute. The conflict represented a fundamental clash of civilizations: the Ottoman Empire's pragmatic, expansionist Sunni Islam against the Safavid Empire's mystical, revolutionary Shia doctrine. Selim I saw himself as the defender of Orthodox Islam, the rightful heir to the Caliphate, while Ismail claimed divine mandate as the representative of the hidden Imam on earth. The strategic implications were staggering. Control of eastern Anatolia meant dominance over the lucrative Silk Road trade routes that connected Europe to Asia. The region's mountain passes and fertile valleys had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires, from the ancient Armenians to the Byzantine Greeks. Now, two Islamic superpowers prepared to add their chapter to this blood-soaked history. According to historical accounts documented by the Encyclopedia Britannica, the build-up to the battle had been methodical and devastating. Selim's forces, numbering approximately 60,000 men, included the elite Janissary Corps Christian boys taken in childhood, converted to Islam, and trained as the empire's most disciplined warriors. These soldiers carried the latest Ottoman innovation, weapons that could shatter cavalry charges and reduce fortifications to rubble. In contrast, Shah Ismail's army relied on traditional nomadic tactics that had served his ancestors well on the steppes of Central Asia. His 40,000 warriors were primarily mounted, archers and lancers, men who had grown up in the saddle and could loose arrows with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed. They fought with the fervor of religious zeal, believing their Shah to be divinely protected and their cause blessed by God himself. The night before the battle, both commanders knew that the outcome would determine far more than territorial boundaries. The victor would claim leadership of the Islamic world, while the defeated would face potential Campfires dotted the darkness on both sides, their flickering flames illuminating the faces of soldiers who prayed in different ways to the same God, preparing for a dawn that would see only one empire left standing. As the first light of day began to pierce the morning mist, the stage was set for one of history's most consequential battles. The silence that preceded the battle was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of Ottoman cannons being wheeled into position. Sultan Selim I sat astride his warhorse, his keen eyes surveying the Safavid lines with the calculating gaze of a predator. Behind him, 200 bronze cannons gleamed in the morning sun, their mouths yawning like hungry beasts, ready to devour the enemy. The Sultan had invested heavily in these instruments of war, understanding that the future belonged to those who could harness the power of gunpowder. Across the field, Shah Ismail I presented a striking contrast. The 27-year-old ruler wore a crimson turban adorned with 12 folds representing the 12 Imams of Shia Islam, and his presence seemed to radiate an otherworldly confidence. His Qizilbash warriors, their red caps blazing like flames in the morning light, believed their Shah possessed supernatural powers. They had seen him survive assassination attempts and emerge victorious from impossible odds, reinforcing their conviction that he was divinely protected. The battle commenced at dawn with the thunderous roar of Ottoman artillery. The sound rolled across the plain like divine judgment, and the earth trembled beneath the feet of both armies. Selim had positioned his cannons in the center of his formation, protected by ranks of janissaries whose disciplined volleys could repel any cavalry charge. The Ottoman strategy was revolutionary for its time. Rather than relying solely on the traditional shock tactics of mounted warriors, they had created a defensive fortress of gunpowder and steel. The first Safavid charge came within moments of the artillery barrage. Thousands of Qizilbash horsemen surged forward like a crimson tide, their war cries echoing across the battlefield as they sought to close the distance before the Ottoman guns could reload. These were men who had conquered an empire through the sheer force of their devotion, warriors who believed that death in battle alongside their divine Shah would guarantee them paradise. But the mathematics of warfare had changed. The Ottoman cannons, loaded with grape shot and chain, carved bloody furrows through the advancing cavalry. Horses screamed and fell, their riders thrown to the ground where they were cut down by disciplined Janissary musket fire. The Safavid forces, accustomed to fighting enemies who shared their technological limitations, found themselves facing a wall of lead and iron that their traditional tactics could not breach. Shah Ismail himself led the second assault, his sword raised high as he called upon his followers to break through the Ottoman lines. His personal guard, the cream of the Safavid nobility, followed him into the maelstrom of gunfire and steel. For a brief moment, it seemed as though divine intervention might indeed favor the Safavid. Several Ottoman positions wavered under the fierce assault, and gaps appeared in their carefully ordered ranks. The young Shah fought with the fury of a man possessed, his blade cutting down enemy soldiers as he pressed ever deeper into the Ottoman formation. His followers, inspired by his example, fought with desperate courage, knowing that their empire's survival hung in the balance. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to claim decisive advantage despite the Ottoman technological superiority. However, the tide began to turn when Ottoman reinforcements arrived from the flanks. Selim I had held back his elite cavalry for precisely this moment, waiting until the Safavid forces were fully committed before unleashing his reserves. The fresh Ottoman troops struck the exhausted Safavid flanks like hammers against an anvil, compressing the enemy formation and forcing them into the killing ground before the cannons. The critical moment came when a cannonball struck perilously close to Shah Ismail himself. The explosion killed several of his bodyguards and wounded the Shah, though he managed to remain in the saddle. The sight of their supposedly invincible leader bleeding and vulnerable shattered the morale of many Qizilbash warriors. Doubt crept into minds that had known only absolute faith, and the tide of battle began to shift inexorably. As the sun reached its zenith, the plain of Chaldoran had become a charnel house where the future of the Islamic world was being written in blood and gunpowder. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the battlefield as the Safavid resistance began to crumble. Shah Ismail I, his crimson turban now stained with blood, realized with growing horror that his divine protection was proving insufficient against Ottoman gunpowder. The wounded Shah's horse stumbled beneath him, and for the first time in his life, the man who had claimed to be the representative of God on earth faced the possibility of mortal defeat. The psychological impact of the Shah's injury rippled through the Safavid ranks like a plague. These were warriors who had followed Ismail since childhood, men who had witnessed his seemingly miraculous victories and had come to believe in his invincibility. Now, seeing their divine leader bleeding and vulnerable, many began to question everything they had been taught about their ruler's supernatural powers. Ottoman forces, sensing the shift in momentum, pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. The Janissaries, those elite soldiers who had been taken as children and molded into perfect instruments of war, advanced in perfect formation. Their muskets spoke in unison, creating devastating volleys that shattered the remaining Safavid cavalry charges. Behind them, the cannons continued their relentless bombardment, turning the battlefield into a hellscape of smoke and shrapnel. Selim I, observing the battle from his command position, recognized that victory was within his grasp. The Ottoman Sultan had studied the art of war with the same dedication that his adversary had studied mystical theology, and now his pragmatic approach was proving superior to divine inspiration. He ordered his cavalry to execute a final, coordinated assault designed to break the Safavid army's spine. The death blow came from an unexpected quarter. A detachment of Ottoman Sipahi cavalry, the traditional mounted warriors of the empire, had circled around the Safavid left flank and now struck at the enemy's baggage train. The sound of Ottoman war cries from behind their own lines sent panic through the remaining Safavid forces, many of whom believed they were being attacked from all sides simultaneously. Shah Ismail, despite his wounds, made one final desperate attempt to rally his troops. He raised his sword high and called upon the name of Ali the first Imam of Shia Islam, seeking to rekindle the religious fervor that had carried his forces to so many previous victories. For a moment, his personal charisma seemed to work its old magic, and several hundred Qizilbash warriors gathered around their wounded leader for one last charge. But the age of gunpowder had arrived, and mystical devotion, no matter how sincere, could not overcome the mathematical certainty of artillery. The Ottoman cannons, repositioned to target the Shah's rally point, opened fire with devastating effect. The barrage scattered the Safavid force like leaves before a storm, and Shah Ismail himself was nearly killed when a cannonball struck the ground mere feet from his horse. The sight of their Shah fleeing the battlefield marked the complete collapse of Safavid resistance. The army that had conquered Persia and threatened Ottoman dominance in the east dissolved into a panicked mob of fleeing soldiers. Many threw down their weapons and begged for mercy, while others attempted to escape across the mountains toward the safety of Persian territory. The Ottoman victory was total and devastating. As the sun began to set on the 23rd of August, 1514, the plain of Chaldron was littered with the bodies of thousands of Safavid soldiers. The red caps of the Qizilbash, once symbols of religious devotion and military prowess, now served as markers for the fallen scattered across the blood-soaked earth. Sultan Selim I rode among the battlefield wreckage, his face grim with the satisfaction of a man who had just secured his empire's future. The victory at Chaldron had eliminated the immediate Safavid threat to Ottoman territory, but more importantly, it had demonstrated the superiority of Ottoman military technology and organization over traditional nomadic warfare. The wounded Shah Ismail managed to escape with a small retinue of loyal followers, but the man who retreated toward Persia was fundamentally changed. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded him since childhood lay shattered on the battlefield, and with it, the Safavid Empire's dreams of westward expansion. The aftermath of the Battle of Chaldron revealed the true cost of Sultan Selim I's triumph. While Ottoman forces celebrated their decisive victory, the strategic implications of the battle extended far beyond the immediate military success. The Sultan stood among the ruins of the Safavid camp, his experienced eye cataloging the spoils of war gold, silk, precious manuscripts, and most importantly, the political capital that came with crushing a rival empire. The human cost had been staggering on both sides. Ottoman casualties, though significantly lighter than those of the Safavids, still numbered in the thousands. The Janissary Corps, the backbone of Ottoman military power, had suffered losses that would take years to replace. These elite soldiers were not merely recruited, they were carefully selected, trained, and indoctrinated in a process that required substantial time and resources. Each fallen Janissary represented a significant investment in the empire's future military capability. For the Safavids, the disaster was even more profound. Tens of thousands of their finest warriors lay dead on the battlefield, their red caps now serving as grim reminders of the price of challenging Ottoman supremacy. The cream of Persian nobility had been decimated, leaving gaping holes in the Safavid administrative and military structure. Many of the tribal leaders who had rallied to Shah Ismail's banner would never return to their mountain strongholds, their absence creating power vacuums that would plague the empire for decades. The psychological impact of the defeat proved even more devastating than the physical losses. Shah Ismail I, once revered as a divine figure by his followers, returned to his capital of Tabriz, a broken man. The Shah, who had once claimed to be the earthly representative of the hidden Imam, now questioned his own divine mandate. Contemporary accounts describe him as withdrawn and melancholy, no longer the charismatic leader who had inspired fanatical devotion among his subjects. The battle's immediate territorial consequences were equally significant. Ottoman forces, emboldened by their victory, swept through eastern Anatolia like a conquering tide. The strategic fortress cities of Erzurum and which had been contested between the two empires, now fell firmly under Ottoman control. These conquests provided the Ottomans with crucial defensive positions that would serve as launching points for future campaigns against Persia. The religious implications of the victory resonated throughout the Islamic world. Sultan Selim I proclaimed himself the defender of Orthodox Sunni Islam, using his triumph over the Safavids to legitimize his claims to leadership of the broader Muslim community. The defeat of Shah Ismail's forces was presented not merely as a military victory, but as divine vindication of Sunni doctrine over Shia heresy. The economic ramifications of the battle were equally profound. Control of eastern Anatolia meant Ottoman dominance over crucial trade routes that connected Europe to Asia. The Silk Road commerce that had enriched countless empires throughout history now flowed primarily through Ottoman-controlled territory. This economic advantage would provide the resources necessary to fund future military campaigns and maintain the empire's technological edge. However, the victory at Chaldron also created new challenges for Ottoman administration. The conquered territories contained diverse populations with complex loyalties, many of whom had initially supported the Sultan. Integrating these regions into the Ottoman system required careful diplomacy and substantial resources. The Sultan appointed trusted governors to oversee the transition, but maintaining control over these distant provinces would prove an ongoing challenge. The battle marked a fundamental shift in the balance of power in the Middle East. The Safavid Empire, though not destroyed, had been permanently weakened and forced to abandon its expansionist ambitions. The dream of creating a great Shah empire that would challenge Ottoman hegemony lay buried beneath the plains of Chaldron, along with thousands of Qizilbash warriors who had died believing in their Shah's invincibility. Sultan Selim I understood that his victory, while decisive, was not final. The wounded Safavid Empire would eventually recover and seek revenge, leading to decades of intermittent warfare between the two powers. The battle had established Ottoman superiority, but maintaining that advantage would require constant vigilance and continued military innovation. The victory at Chaldron proved to be merely the opening chapter in a protracted conflict that would consume both empires for the next 4 decades. Sultan Selim I's triumph had humbled the Safavids, but it had not destroyed them, and the wounded Persian Empire would spend the coming years plotting its revenge while rebuilding its shattered military forces. The immediate aftermath of the battle saw Ottoman forces consolidating their control over eastern Anatolia with characteristic efficiency. Selim I established a network of fortified positions throughout the conquered territory, creating a defensive line that would prevent future Safavid incursions. The construction of these fortifications required massive resources and thousands of workers, but the Sultan understood that permanent conquests required more than military victory. It demanded the establishment of lasting administrative control. The Safavid response to their defeat was complex and multifaceted. Shah Ismail I, his confidence shattered by the battle, withdrew from active military leadership and devoted himself to administrative reforms. The young ruler who had once led cavalry charges now focused on rebuilding his empire's military capabilities, particularly in the area of artillery and firearms. The lesson of Chaldoran was clear: future conflicts with the Ottomans would require technological parity, not merely religious fervor. The Shah's military reforms were revolutionary for their time. He established foundries to cast cannons, recruited foreign engineers to design fortifications, and created new units trained in the use of gunpowder weapons. These changes represented a fundamental shift in Safavid military doctrine, moving away from the traditional nomadic tactics that had served them well against regional opponents, toward the more sophisticated warfare necessary to challenge Ottoman supremacy. The conflict's religious dimensions continued to reverberate throughout the Islamic world. Both empires used their competing claims to religious authority to justify continued aggression against each other. The Ottomans portrayed themselves as defenders of Sunni orthodoxy, while the Safavids claimed to represent the true path of Islam through their Shia doctrine. This theological rivalry ensured that any peace between the two powers would be temporary at best. The economic consequences of the ongoing conflict were severe for both empires. The Ottoman Empire, despite its military victories, found itself constantly defending its eastern frontier against Safavid raids and incursions. The cost of maintaining large armies in the field, combined with the expense of building and garrisoning fortifications, placed significant strain on the imperial treasury. The Safavids faced even greater challenges, as their defeated Chaldoran had disrupted their control over important trade routes and reduced their ability to fund military operations. The human costs of the extended conflict was staggering. Tens of thousands of soldiers from both sides died in battles, sieges, and skirmishes that followed the initial confrontation at Chaldoran. The civilian population of the contested regions suffered even more, as armies from both empires regularly swept through their territories, requisitioning supplies and conscripting young men for military service. The war's impact extended beyond the immediate combatants to affect a broader Middle Eastern political landscape. The European powers, particularly the Habsburg Empire, watched the Ottoman-Safavid conflict with great interest, occasionally providing covert support to the Safavids in hopes of keeping Ottoman forces occupied in the east. This external interference added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted struggle. The conflict also had profound cultural consequences. The artistic and intellectual exchange that had previously occurred between the Persian and Ottoman courts largely ceased, replaced by mutual suspicion and hostility. The magnificent architectural projects and literary works that had flourished under peaceful conditions gave way to military treatises and fortification manuals. As the years passed, both empires gradually exhausted themselves through constant warfare. The initial enthusiasm that had driven their armies to Chaldoran was replaced by war weariness and financial strain. The realization that neither side could achieve decisive victory began to dawn on leaders, who had initially expected quick resolution to their differences. The stage was being set for a negotiated settlement, but the path to peace would prove almost as difficult as the war itself. Both empires had invested too much blood and treasure in the conflict to accept anything less than favorable terms, ensuring that the diplomatic process would be as complex and protracted as the military campaigns that had preceded it. By 1555, both the Ottoman and Safavid empires had reached the limits of their endurance. For decades of intermittent warfare had drained their treasuries, decimated their populations, and exhausted their military capabilities. The time had come for negotiation. Though neither side was willing to admit defeat or accept anything less than advantageous terms, the negotiations leading to the Peace of Amasya began in earnest during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who had succeeded his father Selim I in 1520. Suleiman, despite his warlike reputation, possessed a pragmatic understanding of imperial limitations that his predecessor had sometimes lacked. The Ottoman Empire faced challenges on multiple fronts: European enemies to the west, Mediterranean naval conflicts, and the constant drain of resources required to maintain their eastern frontier. Shah Tahmasp I, who had succeeded his father Ismail in 1524, brought his own perspective to the negotiations. The young Safavid ruler had grown up in the shadow of the Chaldoran disaster, and had spent his entire reign working to rebuild his empire's military and economic strength. Unlike his father, Tahmasp possessed no illusions about divine protection or supernatural powers. He understood that diplomacy might achieve what military force had failed to accomplish. The treaty negotiations took place in the town of Amasya, a neutral location that had historical significance for both empires. The Ottoman delegation was led by Grand Vizier Rustem Pasha, a man renowned for his diplomatic skills and his ability to navigate complex political situations. The Safavid negotiators were equally skilled, understanding that their empire's future depended on securing favorable terms that would allow them to consolidate their remaining territories. The final treaty, signed on May 29, represented a pragmatic compromise that reflected the military realities created by the Battle of 41 years earlier. The Ottomans retained control of most of eastern Anatolia, including the strategic fortress cities of Erzurum and Kars, while the Safavids regained some territories in Mesopotamia, including the important city of Tur. The religious clauses of the treaty were particularly significant. Both empires agreed to cease their propaganda campaigns against each other's religious practices, though they maintained their respective claims to represent true Islam. The Ottomans acknowledged the Safavids' right to practice Shia Islam within their territories, while the Safavids agreed to stop encouraging Ottoman subjects to convert to their faith. The territorial provisions of the treaty established borders that would remain largely unchanged for centuries. The Ottomans accepted the Safavids' control over the Iranian plateau and Central Asia, while the Safavids acknowledged Ottoman dominance over Anatolia and the Ara province. This division reflected the military balance of power that had emerged from decades of warfare, with the Ottomans controlling the territories they had conquered through superior military technology. The economic aspects of the treaty were equally important. Both empires agreed to restore trade relations and to protect merchants traveling through their territories. The Silk Road commerce that had been disrupted by constant warfare could now resume, providing much-needed revenue for both imperial treasuries. The treaty also established mechanisms for resolving border disputes without resorting to full-scale war. The human cost of the 41-year conflict was finally tallied as peace returned to the region. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians had died in battles, sieges, and raids that accomplished little beyond mutual exhaustion. The resources that had been devoted to warfare could now be redirected toward reconstruction and development. Though both empires would bear the scars of their prolonged conflict for generations, the Peace of Amasya marked the end of the great age of Ottoman Safavid warfare. Though tensions between the two empires would continue to simmer beneath the surface, the treaty created a relatively stable balance of power in the Middle East that would persist until the rise of new challenges. Later centuries, the legacy of the Battle of Chaldoran and the subsequent 41 years of warfare extended far beyond the immediate participants. The conflict had demonstrated the decisive importance of military technology in determining the outcome of imperial struggles, while also showing the limits of what military force alone could achieve. The peace that finally emerged was born not from victory, but from mutual recognition that continued warfare served neither empire's interests. This historical narrative draws upon extensive scholarly research into the Ottoman-Safavid conflicts, with particular reference to the comprehensive analysis provided by the Encyclopaedia Britannica on the Battle of Chaldoran and its lasting consequences.